in Russia that are being used to wreak their havoc on Ukraine. And I mean, I'm not privy to all the intelligence and the briefings and the discussions with American allies, but I have to tell you, I wouldn't be surprised, I have no inside knowledge, but I wouldn't be surprised if they've already taken a decision to use them collectively across NATO. They're not going to publicise that, are they? But I wouldn't be surprised if that's the situation. But if we have to do it unilaterally, I think we should. And I'm really proud in the new 72-strong parliamentary party that we have 7 of our colleagues who served in the British Armed Forces and bring to our debates and discussions on this issue real-life experience. I'm really grateful to them. I think you saw them yesterday in that veterans panel, and I think they deserve a lot of our support.
Okay, thank you. So Ed, you're saying if we had to do that unilaterally without the approval of President Biden, then yes, you feel the issue is pressing enough. Hannah Kitching from Barnsley actually put in a question aligned to this, because of course everybody's saying the decision needs to be taken quickly because there are elections coming up for the president in November. And Hannah Kitching asks, how worried should we be about the possibility of Donald Trump being elected this November?
Well, Hannah, thank you for your question. I know you're doing brilliant things in Barnsley with your team there. Let me just start by, in a more positive way, before we get to Trump. I think Kamala Harris and Tim Walz are doing a fantastic job. And I have a confession to you, I'm a bit of a geek on American politics. I have apps on a site called Real Clear Politics. Anyone else? You have, I know you have. 272 in, and I go on them several times a day. I'm looking at the results of the polls in Georgia, North Carolina, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona. Who else is doing this? Because it's an important election, not just for America, but for us and the world. And it's been so thrilling to see how Kamala and Tim have breathed new life into the opposition to what Trump is all about. And I think there's a lesson for us there. The way they've campaigned with hope and optimism. Some of my advisors think they've nicked some ideas from us on roller coasters, but I couldn't possibly comment. But I think it's a lesson for us, because when you're faced with that divisive hate, angry tone that you see from the Republicans, at least the Trump Republicans, and you see from other parts of the far right here and elsewhere, the way to tackle it is to show we're really in touch with real people. We have their emotions, we share their emotions, we share their fun, and we are offering optimism. And that is how you will defeat people like Donald Trump. So shall I answer the question?
Well, yeah, I was going to say, how worried are you then?
I might chest those Real Clear Politics apps. No, Trump would be bad for America. He'd be bad for the UK. He'd be bad for the world, in my view. When it comes to the economy, when it comes to climate change, when it comes to security, when it comes to bringing America together, I think he would be a disaster. Although we are not players in that election, I think we know whose side we're on.
If you were Prime Minister, you wouldn't be saying that, though, would you? Because whoever is elected, the UK government has to work with them. And if you've got a store of comments made by leader of the third largest party now, saying Trump's, we do not want you, it's not going to be very helpful for diplomatic relations, is it?
Well, first of all, I think you just have to tell the truth. And I mean, no one would believe me. I said we wanted Trump to win, but you wouldn't believe me. So let's first of all tell the truth. And you know, if we were faced with that prospect, let's hope nobody is, and we had that first meeting, we'll have to be very robust, because there's a real danger that if a Trump president too would do things that would damage our country. And we would have to persuade him not to. And if he hears that for the first time, that won't be helpful. He needs to know that we're consistent in our position, and we will stand up for what is in our national interest and in the world's interest.
Okay, thank you. Let's move into a few policy areas now, because you've made much of the fact that you want to be constructive in opposition, that you will criticise when necessary, you'll presumably help when necessary. There's a couple of questions here on the NHS, and these strike me as really rather important. Ketish Pothalingam from Islington has asked a very succinct question. Is the NHS sufficiently funded, and at what point does it need more reform than funding? And we know, of course, that Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, has said reform has to come before yet more money goes in. What's your answer?
Well, Ketish, thank you for that question. I just think the idea that you reform without investment and you wait for reform before you invest is just wrong. I think you have to do both together. Now, people say there's a lot of money being spent on the NHS, and in some areas there has, but in many areas there's not enough being spent. And at the election, we said in community health services, GPs, NHS dentists, community pharmacists, we said they've been underfunded. They don't have enough staff. That was our argument, and that's our argument now. And, you know, if you don't get more GPs, if you don't get more NHS dentists, if we don't open those community pharmacists, which are on the front line for many people's healthcare, people will end up going to hospital. That part of the problem has been so many people are going to hospital because we haven't got the primary care as strong as it needs to be. So that upfront investment in primary care is absolutely critical. It will mean you'll take the pressure off the ambulance services, A&E and hospital wards. So I think that has to come first. I don't think you can wait for reform. But let's be clear, we've always been a party of reform. We don't think that how it's done now is always going to be best. You know, technology moves on and so on. But here's the reform that we need most of all, and I'm not hearing it from Labour. And that is reform of social care.
And Ed, can I just step in there? Because, again, there have been plenty of questions asked about social care. Eliza Kidd, for example, in Glasgow, asks about the single thing that you think needs to change to make carers' lives better. So I wonder if you can fold that into what you're going to say about social care.
Yeah, I will do, but let me just say where I'm a bit worried about what Labour's not doing on care. They're not seeing it as a health issue in the way it needs to be. And that is the health reform. It wasn't in their manifesto. The manifesto didn't mention care or carers. The King's speech didn't mention care or carers, and we're pressing for the budget on the 30th of October to be a budget for the NHS and social care and carers. And if it was, it would begin to answer that question. Because I think there are a whole range of things we need to do for carers. And for this part of the answer, it's about family carers who are unpaid, essentially. Many of them, about 1 million, receive carers allowance. It's not a very well-designed support. It's not very generous. And worst of all, it has a cap on how much you can earn, the earnings limit for carers allowance. And it's created a scandal in the way it's been operated by the Department for Work and Pensions. And there are literally tens of thousands of carers who are being asked to pay sometimes thousands of pounds because in a few weeks, they earn just a little bit over that limit, not even knowing they'll be going to, and the whole of the carers allowance is clawed back. It's completely crazy. And people who are doing an amazing job looking after loved ones on a pittance are being asked by the government for tens of thousands of pounds in some cases, and very often thousands of pounds. I have a constituent in my area called Andrea, who's suffering from this. I've raised it. I raised it with Rishi Sunak. I've raised it with Keir Starmer. This is the sort of change that we are championing, and we will win on this, because if we win for carers.
Okay. The tricky question, though, about funding of it. And you're offering a £27 billion pledge for overall public spending, 8.3 billion of it for NHS and social care. The independent health think tank, the Nuffield Trust, I'm just going to quote from them, they say that still falls short of what's needed. Just freezing the NHS budget, the current budget, in real time, in real terms, would require more than 8 billion by the end of this Parliament. So you're pledging money, and of course there are questions about how much you actually can raise. The IFS have questioned your figures, and other independent experts have. But you're scrambling to keep up all the time, aren't you, if you pledge that sort of money?
Well, first of all, our figures are really robust, and I'm very happy to sit down with IFS or anyone else and take them through the figures. I was really proud of our policy team staff and the Federal Policy Committee putting forward the best manifesto and a cost manifesto, and our figures were robust. But the real point of your question, I think, Carolyn, is it enough? Well, first of all, it's the boldest and most ambitious package on offer, and we should be really proud of that. And secondly, I think this is where reform does kick into place under our ideas. So because we want to reform social care and also be more supportive of family carers, that can bring quite a lot of savings as well. And this whole concept of investing to save. So let me take you through some of the basics of it. There are people who are kept in hospital for far too long when they've already had the hospital treatment and can't go into care because the care places aren't there. The care packages aren't there. Their families haven't been given the support to enable them to look after them at home. But it's much more cost effective for them to be out of hospital. Keeping someone in hospital is incredibly expensive. And it actually can be quite disturbing for the patient and their families. So that's where reform and social care reform really comes in. And when we talked in the general election about free personal care, there was a lot of evidence, including from House of Lords Select Committees and other academic organisations, to show if you go for free personal care, you save the NHS by the end of the decade several £billion. So isn't that the right thing to do? Invest now, get the care better, get a more cost-effective use of taxpayers' money. If we do that, we can really reform our systems.
But Ed, you know, the Darzi report this week, which was commissioned by the new Labour government, said that the NHS is broken. It needs radical reform as well as funding. He said austerity, underinvestment throughout the 2010s and the Lansley reforms, remember them, which he calls calamity without international precedents, and they are all to blame for the poor performance of the NHS today. The architects were the governments between 2010 and 2024, and you know who was in government during part of that? You and your colleagues.
Well, of course that's a fact, but what I would say is I think the health service...
Do you take some of the blame, some of the responsibility for the Lansley reforms and the...
Let me come to that. I will promise you to answer that. But I think a lot of the damage to health and care has been done since 2015. The 2014 Care Act, which Liberal Democrat ministers like Paul Burstow and Norman Lamb got through, the Tories reneged on it in 2015. And because of their failure to take the care reforms that the coalition and the Liberal Democrats had led on, there's 1 million pensioners, disabled people who are not getting care now because the Tories reneged on what we had achieved. And if that had happened, a lot of the problems in the NHS, we wouldn't be seeing them now because you'd have had some of that social care reform already. So I have to say the Conservatives have to take quite a lot of blame for failing to follow through on the reforms that we had led on. And they did things since 2015 like ending bursaries for student nurses, which led to vacancies in nursing staff, which has caused so many problems in so many parts of the NHS. So I have to say, I think a lot of the problems, and I think a lot of Darzi says this, occurred just under the Tory watch only. But let me take your point on. There's been a lot of reorganisations of the NHS over many decades. There's a whole range of them, including the Darcy reforms in 2012.
The Lansley reforms, you mean?
Yeah, you're right, the Lansley reforms.
Don't blame Lord Darcy.
The truth is, many of those reforms didn't deliver on what they promised. And that was another set of reforms. And this is where I think we can be unique in the Liberal Democrats in putting the NHS and social care right at the centre of our plans. So often, governments have failed on capital spending on the NHS, on moving the deck chairs, and they failed to focus on the things that really matter, the health of primary care. If you get primary care right, you make a big difference. If you get social care right, you make a big difference. These are the things we've talked about, and many of those reforms that you mentioned and past reforms didn't do that.
Okay.
So our focus, I think, is right.
All right, lovely. Thank you. And that folded in, I hope Ben Williams in York and Eliza, you didn't mind me folding those questions in, but they're all so relevant and they're quite pressing issues. Can we turn to another issue now that, of course, is familiar Lib Dem territory? Rosie Schimmel in Southwark asks, what's the route to proportional representation? Now it's clear that Keir Starmer isn't going to make significant electoral reforms.
Well, Rosie, thank you for that question. I'm sure there are lots of members here who would have asked that question. I mean, first of all, let's be absolutely clear. We remain completely committed to getting rid of this appalling electoral system we have in our country. Just because we've had the best success we've ever had under it doesn't mean we're in favour of it. Our great party has been in favour of proportional representation for over 100 years, and we ain't going to change our minds now. So we will make the case, Carolyn, and Rosie, we've been making the case for a long time. I can't tell you that it's suddenly going to happen. It's disturbing if Labour, who had actually passed policy on this in the last party, remember that? Labour Party Conference passing policy on it, don't proceed with those reforms. But there will be colleagues in the Labour parties outside politics who realise this is important. When I go around the country, people feel that our political system just isn't working, that it's not responsive enough, that too many people's voices aren't heard, that people's votes are wasted. And unless we change our electoral system, that won't change. PR unlocks the door to so many reforms, and we will still champion it.
But if PR had been in operation this election, you know what I'm going to say, you would be the fourth largest party behind Reform UK. They got 14% of the vote this time, only 5 MPs. You've got 12% of the vote. You've got effectively 12% of the number of MPs. And 72 of them. What's the fairness in that?
Well, first of all, we'd have had still even more MPs under PR. Let's remember that. But secondly, I think when it comes to reform and the Conservatives, I don't know about you, but I increasingly can't see that much difference. Their policy programmes seem increasingly very, very similar. And when I bother to listen to what the Tory leadership candidates are saying, they don't recognise what a complete mess they made of our country, and they are flirting with reform. So, I think that's the reality, Carolyn. There would have been some Conservative MPs voted, but in a different party. So
there won't be a Nigel Ed team up then to campaign together for PR?
He just can't jet ski.
Okay, fair enough. I'll take that as a no then. Let us move on to another question. Sarah Dobson in Reading asks, climate change is an existential threat, and Lib Dems have worked for a long time on what needs to be done to tackle it. But how do we build the public and political will to make it happen?
Great question, Sarah. I mean, it's an issue that is close to all our hearts. And I'm so proud of Liberal Democrats in councils and in Westminster, where we have fought the case for action on on climate change. You know, my experience in government working with my Liberal Democrat colleagues was if you got really good action, you actually brought the price of green action down. Renewable power is so much cheaper now thanks to the policies that Liberal Democrats enacted. And that's the way, I think, to win people from all sides of the political spectrum, to show that if you take action on climate, you bring prices down. If you insulate people's homes, it's the best saving they'll ever make on their energy bill. So there are these arguments that we can run, and we can point to the costs if you don't act. We all see the costs of flooding. We see the costs imposed on our farmers. We see so many costs there. I think people are beginning to realize that the most effective thing we need to do for our country and our world is take action on climate change. And by the way, if you go out onto the promenade outside, do remember to wave at the wind farms out there, because Liberal Democrats made them happen.
Actually, I noticed them today. I thought, were they there the last time that we were in Brighton? I can't remember that they were. They're relatively new, I think, but anyway.
Well, we signed the contract for them, and then they got built, so that's
right.
the key thing.
Okay, all right. Just on climate change then, obviously you know that there have been various moves in the timetable for going to net zero. Is it 2030? Is it 2035 for cars? Is it 2050 for the overall target? Is it 2045 still, as you have said? But then there's also the expense, and you campaigned during the election on cost of living issues as well as the environment and health. And you know that many, many people say, I just can't afford to put one of these new boilers in, or I can't afford to insulate my home. So when people hear you and other politicians saying, oh, we've got to be aware of the climate, they think, well, I haven't got the money to do that.
Well, I understand that. What I would say is part of the cost of living crisis has come from high energy bills caused by volatile fossil fuel prices. If we remain dependent on gas and coal and all the fossil fuels, you will see high energy prices and high energy bills and the cost of living, because that's what history shows us. So the best way to get bills down permanently is to insulate people's homes. The best way to deal with the cost of living pressures coming from energy bills is to invest in renewables. That is the long-term correct approach. Now, you're right to say, Karen, how do we get from where we are now to there? Clearly, you need government support for people who can't afford things. What we did in government through our support mechanisms was get the price of renewable electricity down below that is generated by fossil fuels in a relatively short period by government intervention. So I think we show the way forward, get a real good policy framework that brings in billions of pounds of investment, brings in the new technology, brings jobs to the UK, and brings people's bills down. And I think that is the way forward. And I think we can win that argument. I think the evidence backs up what we've been saying.
And what about those people who turn to drastic protest action to highlight the issue of climate change? Do you believe Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion, do you believe their tactics are counterproductive? Are they turning people off these issues?
Well, listen, I understand how strongly people feel about this issue, because it is an issue that goes to our hearts. When you're thinking about your children and your grandchildren, the future of our planet, of course people feel strongly about it. But I don't think breaking the law is the answer, because I think you lose people, you lose the argument. And we've just won, and other parties have won, who believe the sorts of things we do on renewables and energy insulation through a democratic election. And what our job now is to hold Labour's feet to the fire on this. We've seen some good early noises from Ed Miliband. I will say that some of the things that he's saying on renewables are really welcome. And I think one of the reasons I'm talking about constructive opposition is if the government is doing something that's good, we say that. If they're doing something that's in the national interest, we should support that. But I can assure you from my perspective, from the Liberal Democrats' perspective, we'll be watching them to make sure they are more and ambitious, they're reaching out there, and they're reaching with our international allies, particularly in Europe. Because, we've got to get our policies better in this country. And the Conservatives made such a mess of it. They've really got to turn that round fast for our domestic policies. But they've got to do a lot more work internationally. And one of the disasters of the many disasters of the Conservatives is they trashed Britain's reputation internationally on climate change. And they were prepared to see a coal mine open in Cumbria. And I'm so pleased that the courts have struck that down.
So you would work with Ed Miliband where necessary, and going back to cross-party working, things like social care, if there is a royal commission set up as part of this 10-year plan that Keir Starmer's setting out, would you happily work with the Labour government again? Because we know what happened last time cross-party talks were attempted on social care, and we're still arguing about it now.
Well, Carolyn, I approach these with some hope and optimism. I think we've got the arguments, we've got the evidence, and we should engage. I think that's a much more mature, constructive way to politics than the yardie politics you too often see. So whether it's on climate change and renewables, whether on social care, yeah, we want to engage. But be clear, there are two things. First of all, if we disagree, we'll still say that. We'll be really clear. We want to get consensus, but we will be robust for our values and our priorities. And secondly, cross-party talks, Royal Commission, whatever it is, shouldn't be an excuse for actions now which are no regrets and which are self-evidently correct. So take care and social care. Sorting out the carers allowance repayment scandal, that should be done now. Can't wait for a Royal Commission. Getting a higher minimum wage for care workers so we can reduce the number of vacancies in social care. That doesn't need a Royal Commission. That's so obvious. Let's do that now. So yes, cross-party, but don't let that be an excuse for some of the actions that need to be taken urgently.
Okay. Aubrey Claridge in Horsham has an interesting question here. To sustain our electoral success, particularly in the south, how do we square the circle of increased population and housing demand with necessary environmental protections?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I've always felt that our approach, which has been tried in a number of places and which works really well, where you engage with the community about the housing need and about the challenges that means to any community, is the right approach. We've called it a community-led approach as opposed to the developer-led approach that we've seen for decades. And, we changed the law quite a few years ago to allow neighbourhood planning. And neighbourhood planning is very much like the community-led approach that we advocate, where the community comes together and says, yeah, we'll have these extra houses, that's a good place to build them, but we need so many of them to be affordable, we need water infrastructure built, we need NHS infrastructure built. That approach has been tried following the law that we changed, and a government study of the results of that showed that it was really successful, that more homes got built, that they were more in tune with the needs of the local community. So I think we need to stick to our guns. We need a community-led approach to planning, to build the houses we need, and make sure they are built in a sustainable way. I believe it absolutely can be done. And one of the many reasons I know it can be done is because of my wife. My wife, Emily, is the housing portfolio holder on Kingston Council. She's in charge of the largest council home building programme that our area has seen for over 40 years, and she's doing it in a really sustainable way. And I know there are lots of Liberal Democrat councils who are doing just that. We know it can be done. That's the way forward.
Yeah. But what you call community-led approach, other people say is NIMBYism. And you and your party and some of your MPs have been accused of being NIMBYs, opposing schemes. Lib Dem run councils have opposed schemes, for example, in South Oxfordshire. You yourself described proposals for thousands of homes being built in Surrey near your constituency as eye-watering. You can't have it both ways, can you? You've just got to get rid of some of these regulations, some of the planning log jams, and get on with building, because people need homes.
Well, they do. They absolutely do. But the problem with that argument, and I had an argument during the general election campaign with Nick Robinson, who gave me some examples of different Liberal Democrat local authorities and campaigners opposing building, and I was able to give him a whole long list of where Liberal Democrats were building. And the truth is...
Not a competition.
But the point is that every individual site has to be judged on its merits. I don't think anyone thinks we should just build anywhere. And I think there are a whole range of things that need to be taken into account. And one of the reasons we've got into the mess we have with sewage is that a lot of development was undertaken without thinking of the water infrastructure that needed to go there. So I have to say, our approach is the right approach, sustainable in so many ways.
Okay. And that's bearing in mind that a lot of your seats now are in overcrowded bits of the southeast, Surrey, Oxfordshire, Hertfordshire, Cambridgeshire. So how do you balance up the being local champions, as you like to call your local regional workers and members of the party? How do you balance that up with sort of detoxifying the brand nationally if people think, oh, the Lib Dems will say one thing in the local area and then another thing nationally?
Well, we've now got 72 powerful voices to answer that. Now we've got the third-party status back again. Now we've got such a fantastic set of colleagues. You're going to hear a lot more from us. And some of the myths that are put about us we'll be able to challenge more and harder. And because we are running so many local councils now, more to come, I hope and expect, I think we can show that on the ground, Liberal Democrats are squaring that circle incredibly well. It can be done. We are doing it. We will do it.
All right. Thank you. Sam Barrett in Lewisham points out, you might have noticed the election targeting strategy worked. Thanks, Sam. But how do we expand to ensure that we are a party that represents and has representatives across our nations? So, you know, You've got further to go, haven't you? If you want to become the opposition and not the third party, you'd need to take, 25 Tory seats? Is that the ambition? Where do you go from here?
No ceiling on the ambition. But let me take you through it. I mean, first of all, let's deal with the Conservatives. If you look at them and you look at our values, I think they're the biggest threat to liberal values in Britain today. I think they showed that in spades in how appallingly they governed. I think you hear that in so many parts of the Conservative Party. So I'm really proud we won so many Conservative seats. I'm determined we win many more. We've knocked down quite a lot of the blue wall. We're going to knock down the rest of it. And when you look at the facts, not only have we taken basically mostly Conservative seats, but in seats where we're second, the vast majority are Conservative seats still. So in a practical way, that's where we can make advance. But, and here's the thing, if we really work our local elections in cities and towns across our whole country, I think we can get the voice of liberalism back in our cities, and we need to do that. You know, so many cities in our country, in my time in politics, were run by great Liberal Democrats. And we want to run them again. And if we do that, if we take a UK-wide approach to building ourselves up in local government, I think we can take a lot more seats the next election.
Are there any no-go areas?
No, why should there be?
Now, we have a question from Mackenzie Gregory in Baber. What advice would you give to under 18-year-olds who want to get more involved in politics?
Oh, that's a great question, Gregory. Well, first of all, read, study, talk to your friends, talk to your families, and also look at your local community. Do you think it's working right? Are people who are vulnerable in your community getting a good deal? And work out how you want to do something about that. And obviously, young people rightly, I think older people too, can be quite idealistic about the world they want. And I would encourage young people to be idealistic, to think about how you can change our world. And I think it's important that we offer them hope and optimism in doing that. And let me give you one example. When I go to schools and talk about renewable power and climate action, people are interested in that in and of itself. But I say, just imagine a world where we brought solar power to all the villages in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, in Asia and Latin America, in the poorest communities in our world, more than 1 billion people. If they had electricity, which the fossil fuel companies have never brought to them, but micro solar power could, what a benefit that would be to them, to their lives, to their health, to their education, to their economy. So I think renewable power is part of that idealism that I want to engage young people in, because it could tackle world poverty. And here's the other thing. It's also about security and peace in our world, because the people who foster a lot of the wars and conflicts and fund them in our world have got rich on oil. You know, where do you think Putin's getting his money from? There are many other world leaders, I'm afraid, who their insidious behavior that causes conflict comes from their fossil fuel wealth. Let's really invest in renewables around the world and put these oil dictators out of business and bring more peace to our world.
Thank you. And obviously, you're campaigning still to lower the voting age. You're campaigning still to lower the voting age. Do you think you've got an ally with Labour now?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we've voted as a party to get the voting age to number 16 time after time, and Labour promised it, so they need to deliver.
Okay. We've only got a few minutes left. It's a massive subject, but I feel I need to ask it. Chris Hudson in Southwark says Labour's putting growth at the centre of their plans to rescue the economy. How are they going to achieve that while ruling out access to efforts to get our farmers and businesses access to the single market? And of course, that is the big issue of Brexit. I don't know if you'll be going to the Glee Club. I've read about the revised wording of the Mary Poppins song about Brexit, but maybe you won't be singing along to that, will you?
Well, you're better informed than I am about that.
I think it's basically the message from 2019 in song. Don't know if I can say the B word here.
Let me bring you to 2024. What I'd say is that although Labour has made a tentative start to re-engage with our European friends and neighbours, and it's good to see the Prime Minister going to Europe, and as I said, where I see good things, I'll point them out. I'm afraid their approach is too timid. By ruling out Britain going back into the single market, I think they're undermining that rapprochement. We said at the election that should not be ruled out, that should be part of the strategy, and we stick by that. And I don't think our economy and the trade deals we need to strike before we go back to the single market, I don't think they'll be as strong as they could be and need to be to get our economy and our country back on track. And let me give you another example where you could do this relatively quickly, where I think the government is being nowhere near ambitious enough, and that's on the youth mobility scheme. You know, many of our European neighbours are willing to agree a whole range of things, whether it's on crime or on security, on climate change, on trade, and to help repair that relationship. And one of the things they put on the table is a youth mobility scheme. Now, we have a youth mobility scheme at the moment with Australia, with Canada, with Japan, South Korea, Andorra, San Marino. Why can't we have a youth mobility scheme with the rest of Europe? So I'm grateful for the question. We will be pushing forward and hard for a much more ambitious approach on our relationship with Europe.
But what about making your party distinct, having that unique argument, being unequivocally pro-European? I mean, can I do a very quick...
We are unequivocally pro-European, aren't we?
Yeah, but pro-EU. Can I do a very quick show of hands? Sorry to embarrass you. Who would like now the policy to be, we go back in the EU? So, okay. So, Ed, I'm putting you on the spot, I know, but is it too difficult politically to start using that kind of language now?
No, I think the issue is you have to rebuild trust with our European friends. That's the issue. I mean, but I've debated this with friends and members across the whole country many times. I think we all agree the Conservatives have so damaged Britain's relationship with the European Union that it's going to take a little while to repair. And what we've done as passionate pro-Europeans is said how to do that. We're the only party doing it. You know, we passed policy here at the conference talking about the 4 steps to do that, including getting back into the single market as our objective. We campaigned on that. We'll continue to campaign on that. I think you heard, we know, that if you want to take action on so many things to help the lives of people that we represent, you have to work with our European friends.
Okay, thank you. A couple of minutes left for some quick-fire questions. Indulge me. Okay, first question. Would you go on Strictly?
Well, I'll tell you what, my advisors will want me to go on Strictly.
Okay. Is that a yes or a no? How much do you obey orders from the advisors?
Well, I'm delighted to say health and safety rules sometimes get in the way.
Okay. Now, you did some stunts, as we know, during the election campaign. What was your favourite, and are there any that you wish you'd turned down?
Well, the answer to the second question is no. I got a kick out of most of them, all of them actually, honestly. My favourite was, I think, the slip and slide we did in Somerset with now the MP for Frome and East Somerset, Anna Sabine. I think she told the rally about some difficult manoeuvre she had to make. Let's not go into that now. That was fun. Do you know, I actually enjoyed the bungee jump. Everyone said, why? The key thing, if you ever decide to do it, is to look at the horizon. Don't look down. Josh, who did it with me, looked down. Do you know what he saw? He saw a cemetery. Oh. So always go for the horizon and jump for the horizon. It can be quite fun.
Okay, maybe the next question ties in a little bit with that, but what do you do that makes your children cringe?
Well, my adorable little boy John, who has a few challenges in communication, he's got a great sense of humour, and he teases me. I'm not sure if I make him cringe. I do make my daughter cringe.
Embarrassing
quite
dad?
A lot. Yeah, I think if I do dancing to Sweet Caroline, she's not so keen.
What record would be your desert island disc?
Oh, well, you get 6, don't you? Is it 8? Oh, 8, fantastic. You
can give us a couple if you want.
Well, obviously it had to be Sweet Caroline. That goes without saying. Do you know, I was a choir boy when I was younger, and I quite like a bit of church music, choir music. Allegri Misery, how about that? No, thoughts for that?
No.
That's a surprise.
Yeah. That's good.
What else? Like, I've got a very eclectic taste, you know.
But that's good. That's good.
From Coldplay to everything but the girl. It was a stage in my life, you know.
Because you know, some politicians, we won't name them, but people think that their advisors have drawn up the list of the music that they they ought to have been listening to. Would your advisors do that to you?
Well, they'd try. But no, I actually have got loads of different singles. If I had my smartphone here, I'd show you all the different things that I listen to.
All right, well, we will hold that for another time, because unfortunately, Ed, our time is up. That's all we've got time for, so thank you so much for your questions and for you for answering them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Friends, can I on your behalf thank Carolyn?
Thank you. It's all your questions. It's all your good ideas.
And your questions. Thank you for submitting them, and thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of the conference. And you might want to come on Tuesday, lunchtime, afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Right. Thank you. Thanks, Carl.
Conference, could I ask people to come to order and to be silent? I have an announcement to make. Conference, it is with great sadness I stand here now to share with you the sad passing of one of our members. I'm sorry to have to inform you that tragically Councillor Robin Bradburn passed away yesterday whilst here at conference. Robin was the leader of the Lib Dem group on Milton Keynes Council, having first been elected in 2010. I want to first extend all of our deepest sympathies to Robin's family. Robin's wife Marie served alongside him in the same ward, and this year is the mayor of Milton Keynes. Likewise, Robin and Marie's daughter Kerry is also a member of the council. Serving the residents of Milton Keynes is a family affair, and they were all very well led in this by Robin. Alongside their daughter Kerry, there's also the son Alan and grandchildren who he loved dearly. To all of them, we want you to know that your wider Lib Dem family is thinking of you.